On page 408 of your textbook in chapter 13, dealing with the topic of time-based editing, there's a section called a simple editing scenario in which I lay out some of the basic strategies for creating a simple sequence within a professional time-based editing program. Really, it's basic editing 101 types of stuff. So in this tutorial, I'm going to walk through what I described beginning in that section on page 408. So to do that, we're going to go over to Avid Media Composer. If you're not familiar with Avid Media Composer, it's one of a handful of professional NLEs, professionally designed nonlinear-based editing softwares that a lot of people who spend their time in putting together documentary films, narrative feature films, television programs, corporate video projects, and so forth would be familiar with this software application. It's a professional tool for organizing a visual and oral narrative with the idea of telling stories and creating a meaningful experience for your viewer. So before I get started, let me just remind you of a couple of terms that are in the book, the last several chapters dealing with these terms. One is a voiceover, and right now I've placed a voiceover in my source monitor, and if we just listen to that for a second, you'll be able to hear my voice talent.
Time, occasion, or circumstance.
And he's reading a script that was written for this project that I just finished editing. And there's no accompanying video. This is just simply audio. It's a voiceover. It's spoken narrative that was recorded in an audio production studio. Now we also have interview segments. If it's a nonfiction news story or a corporate video project like this one, it could just be people telling parts of the story. They're sort of experts, or they're somehow related to the content of whatever's going on. I'll pull up a section of this just so you can see it. And this is a person who was interviewed for this particular project, and we're going to take a sound bite or a section of this interview, and I'll just play a portion of it for you.
And to have the opportunity to do the things necessary.
And we're going to take an excerpt from this long interview, which is, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes long, 5 minutes long, and we're going to copy a portion of this interview into the timeline. And we would refer to that as a sound bite, or as in the lingo of TV news, an SOT, because this is synchronized audio and video together. SOT means sound on tape. So as I copy the video from this interview into the timeline, I'm also going to be copying the audio that's associated with it. So it'll be synchronized. The video and audio will come in together as one. Whereas in a voiceover, I don't have any video. It's just simply audio content that will be copied from the source monitor down in my timeline. And then the third thing that we'll look at is called B-roll. I won't explain where that term comes from, but this is covered in your book. And B-roll is the support video that will be used to reinforce sort of the oral narrative content of the story. So as people are speaking and telling parts of the story either through a voiceover or through a soundbite, very often what we'll do is we'll put on top of that, sort of in a layered fashion, images of whatever it is that they're talking about on screen to support the oral narrative. And so here's just an example. And that's just a shot of a young man letting his parachute go as part of an engineering class. And there's audio behind this as well that's background audio, what we would call ambient sound or natural sound. Sometimes we abbreviate it and we just call it nat sound. So very often with B-roll, you have the audio component of B-roll is referred to as natural sound, because it's not necessarily an interview or something that was planned to be spoken, but it's just the background audio of the event or the sequence that we're looking at. So in this tutorial, again, beginning on page 408, we go through this simple editing scenario. I'm going to begin building my linear timeline using the vo-sot-vo method of editing. I'm going to edit first a voiceover into the timeline. That voiceover will be audio only. There'll be no video associated with it. Then following the voiceover, I'm going to edit in an SOT, a soundbite. That's going to go with that, and then I'm going to end with a voiceover. So this is going to be vo-sot-vo, a voiceover followed by an SOT, an interview or soundbite, followed by a voiceover. And then we'll come back and we'll do the second phase of editing, or the second pass, in which I insert B-roll and natural sound over top of that. So to begin this tutorial, I'm going to load in my voiceover clip, and I've got numbers written down here, so hopefully I can go to these pretty quickly. I'm looking for 157.23, which is right around here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the I key on my keypad to insert an endpoint. And you'll notice right here that a little bracketed symbol appeared in the time bar for my source monitor. I'll go ahead and undo that just so you can sort of see that again. If I zoom in and select I on my keyboard, it puts in an endpoint marker, letting the editor know that this is where I want the voiceover clip to begin in my master sequence below. And I'm going to hit the space bar to play this just to make sure I'm where I want to be.
At its core, the mission of the Elon Academy is all about opportunity.
I'll hit my space bar again after the word opportunity. That's where I want this particular section of the voiceover to end. So now I'm going to add an out point where my playhead is parked in the source monitor by selecting the letter O on my keyboard. And incidentally, the I and the O are standard keyboard shortcuts in just about every nonlinear editing program. So if you can learn to use keyboard shortcuts as you're editing, find out from the maker of the software that you're using what the specific keyboard shortcuts are, it will speed up your workflow and allow you to operate a lot more quickly. And the spacebar is another great shortcut tool. It's used to start and stop the playhead in whichever viewing environment you happen to be in. So if I'm in the source monitor and I hit the spacebar,
with a challenging academic curriculum,
that particular material that's loaded into the source monitor begins to play. When I hit the spacebar a second time, it stops it. So these shortcuts are invaluable, and they will speed up your workflow and help you to work a lot more efficiently. So in Chapter 13, I talk about three-point editing, and what I've done just now, and just to remind you, I'll zoom back in, is I've set 2 points. I've set an in point and an out point in my source monitor for my voiceover clip. So I have 2 points selected. The third point is for my timeline, and I can either physically set a real point, or I can just park the playhead in my timeline where I want to take the trimmed material in my source monitor and put it into the timeline. Just to make this consistent, I'm going to go ahead and put an endpoint into the timeline. So I'm going to select my timeline down here, give it focus, and again, just to show you how this works, I'll zoom in so you can see it, and I'll mark I. And it doesn't really show up because it's right at the head of the timeline, but it's there. And then to complete the edit, I'm going to go ahead and do a splice in. And there's my voiceover that has now populated this specific region of my timeline. Just a couple of seconds, really, of a voiceover clip. And I can scrub now with my playhead in my timeline. And if you notice, look up here in the program monitor, and there's a playhead icon there as well. And as I scrub down here in the timeline, you'll notice that the corresponding playhead icon in the program monitor scrubs with me. The program monitor and the timeline are synchronized together, and they play in unison as you begin to build your project. So again, as a review, I've inserted my first voiceover. We won't take this long to do every edit, but just because this may be new to you, just to remind you of what we did was to take a very, very small portion, just a few seconds, out of this long voiceover clip that's loaded in my source monitor, mark an in and out point here, mark an in point down here in my timeline, and perform a splice in edit or an insert edit to put that material in a linear order at the beginning of my sequence. So if I park my playhead down here at the beginning of my timeline and hit my spacebar, you'll be able to hear that trimmed section of the voiceover clip.
At its core, the mission of the Elon Academy is all about opportunity.
Okay, so I'm going to let my playhead just end at the end of that voiceover down here in my timeline, in my sequence, and it's parked at the very end of the first clip that we put into the timeline. Now I want to put in my first soundbite, my first SOT. So I'm going to go and load that in, and that clip is right here. And I'm going to navigate to the endpoint for that, which is at 137.07. Somewhere right in there. I think I'm at it exactly, so I'm looking for that time code marker right there, 137.07. And I'm going to go down to where my playhead is marked, and I'm going to set an endpoint. I'm going to end with 153.04, so let me just back that up a little bit. And there's my ending point. I'm going to select the letter O to mark an out point. So I have an in point and an out point marked in my source monitor. Down here in my sequence, I'm going to mark an in point. And again, 3-point editing. So I'm marking my source material with an in point and an out point, and my timeline with only an in point. And the reason I don't need a 4th point is because nonlinear editing software programs are very adept at doing the math. It can take the time that has been designated here with an in and out point and just simply add it down here to my in point to compute where the clip would end in the timeline. All right, and so I'm going to go ahead and splice that in. And there it is. So if I, just for reviewing, if I go back into my previous clip and play through this, this is what we have so far.
About opportunity.
I think it's a really neat program that reaches out and identifies children in our system that would be successes in higher education, and it provides the opportunity for them to see what the college campus is like and to see what college classes are like.
All right, so we'll let the playhead just end naturally at the end of the sequence that I'm building in the timeline. That will be my endpoint for the next edits. I'll just go ahead and select the letter I to mark an endpoint down here in my sequence, and I'll go back up to my source monitor to load back in my voiceover clip, and I'm going to look for 222.27, which is right around in here, and I'm going to select the letter I on my keyboard to mark an endpoint there. Look for 232.14. There it is, and I'll mark an O. Select the letter O to mark my out point. And so my second voiceover has now been marked in my source monitor. I'll splice that in and place that at my timeline. So very quickly, we've created the basic building blocks for an edited narrative sequence within a nonlinear editing program using the vo method of editing. I have my first voiceover, my first soundbite, and my second voiceover. And let's just play through this real quickly.
At its core, the mission of the Elon Academy is all about opportunity.
I think it's a really neat program that reaches out and identifies children in our system that would be successes in higher education, and it provides the opportunity for them to see what the college campus is like and to see what college classes are like.
Each summer, the Elon Academy extends this ambitious mission to a new group of academically gifted and promising students.
And so that's the beginning of a linear sequence within a nonlinear time-based editing program. We have about 30 seconds or more of actual program content, and in the next tutorial we'll go back and look at how we do the second pass, because I have a lot of work still to do. Over top of these voiceover segments there's no video, so the next step will be to edit in my B-roll and natural sound to complete this first portion of my program sequence.